begin first with an example of what the British government had expected to happen throughout America and all of their colonies in the New World in North America and the Caribbean. And that was in the colony of Nova Scotia, which some during that era have called the 14th colony on the American coastline. Nova Scotia, for those of you who don't know geographically where that is a colony, or that is a piece of land in Canada, which is just to the northeast of Maine. It's basically Maine's northeastern neighbor, or it's more east than northeast of Maine, but it's still a little to the northeast. And Nova Scotia had been established by the British, and it really had a class setup that was similar to the one that you saw in Britain. You had a privileged or ruling class who basically ran a lot of things in Nova Scotia. They were the ones who were the prosperous ones, and they often benefited from the fact that they had connections to the British government. And then you had the working and artisan classes in Nova Scotia. These tended to be rather poor. They didn't have much influence. Even though Nova Scotia did have a legislature, it was largely dominated by this ruling class. And so self-government was really not a strong aspect in Nova Scotia's government. They were modeled on Britain more closely than the other colonies were. When the Stamp Act when it comes time to enforce the Stamp Act in Nova Scotia, there are some initial protests, like in Massachusetts. There's an effigy of the stamp man that's hung from a tree in the city of Halifax, which is the capital of Nova Scotia, but there's no mob accompanying it. And basically the incident is dismissed as a silly prank, which was what they had hoped would happen in Massachusetts. And when the stamp distributor comes, yes, there's some mumblings against him, but there's no real open opposition, and the law is basically put into effect. The only place where you see any real resistance is in some of the more local towns. On one town in particular, there was a bonfire where they burned some things and so on, and basically chanted that they were liberty, property, and no stamps, and things of that nature. But in the colony as a whole, they mostly gave in and submitted to the act. The only reason that the act stopped being enforced was that they ran out of stamp paper eventually. The only place where they weren't really to enforce it was with trading vessels that would come in from the other 13 colonies. And in that case, what happened there was that trade was the basic thing that kept Nova Scotia's economy going, and so Nova Scotia was inclined to overlook the fact that that they had unstamped papers, that these ships had unstamped papers that they were coming into port with. They would simply take down the name of the person who owned the ship, the name of the captain, and what the ship's name was and what their cargo was, just for later, just so that they could have a record later if they did have to enforce the financial penalties that would come with not following the law. So basically that was what the British government was hoping they were going to get from a lot of the other American colonies, but obviously they only really got it in Nova Scotia. And of other note, that some historians have said that this was the issue that began to drive the wedge, which would result in two different countries being formed on the American continent, namely the United States of America and Canada. Canada would largely be more submissive to what Britain's laws and regulations were, while the United States, of course, is defiant. And some historians, again, have pointed to the Stamp Act of 1765 as the issue which began to drive this wedge between the colonies far to the north, the British colonies far to the north, and the 13 colonies along the seacoast.